are a registered dietitian who is in a season, which many of us are, a season of scaling, one of the things that we learn very quickly as entrepreneurs is often it is not about working harder, it's about working smarter. And one of the things I have found self-help personal growth books do for me as Amy P, the reimbursement dietitian, is it forces me to think way differently. And one of the biggest ways I feel like I continue to grow as a business owner is through reading. Specifically, books for me that challenge how I think about leadership, different systems that I may not be aware of, different pricing structures, but most importantly, how I make decisions. And because as registered dietitians, we are rock stars, right? We have great clinical training, but when it comes to scaling successful private practices, we often don't have the skill set. So in this video today, I thought it would be really fun to break down some of my favorite personal growth books so far I have read that really have influenced the way that I think about scaling private practices, how I think about building better systems and making higher level CEO decisions. So if you're a dietitian who wants to grow beyond one-on-one sessions and build something that is super sustainable, the books that we're going to talk about today will absolutely expand how you think. So let's get to it. But before we do that, if you do not know me, I am Amy Plano, the reimbursement dietitian, and I help dietitians and CNSs build nutrition empires based on the medium of insurance. So some of the best books I have read so far, and some of them have been by some of the same authors. I'm actually going to start with a bonus one that I have not been talking about, but has actually been one of my favorite books to date, which is The Science of Scaling by Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I don't even know how I found this book, but I think I got influenced by an ad or something of nature on Instagram. And this actually led me down a rabbit's hole of, I think, three to four of his other books. The science of scaling is, and why it's so important, is it really talks about looking at your business and deciding what needs to go. I think as entrepreneurs, we spend a lot of times thinking about what to add to our business, not necessarily what to take away. And when I say what to take away, it's really to kind of make room for more of the things that are going to scale and expand your business, right? So you guys know that saying, if we're working on everything, we're working on nothing. And so the science of scaling really breaks down this concept of going all in on one piece of your business and basically quieting your mind from everything else. And why I love this book so much for dietitians, especially entrepreneurs, is I think that we really struggle with focus. And as soon as we really realize it's a systematic error, meaning it's something we're all doing, I think once we're self-aware, we're really able to kind of drive the point home. So I would say single-handedly to date, one of my favorite books is The Science of Scaling, once again by Dr. Benjamin Hardy. So absolutely love that book. It really changed my perspective on what to work on in my business and when. Kind of this concept of what is urgent, important, and then is going to make me money. So that was one of my favorite books of all times. Let's talk about what are some of my other ones. So 10 times easier, I'm sorry, ten times is easier than two times. This book is also by Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and then Dan Sullivan, which you guys may have known. He's kind of like a pretty big deal in the industry of kind of personal growth. This book focuses on the idea that significant growth often requires simplification. So, similar to that scaling book, rather than increased effort. So, many entrepreneurs assume that scaling requires doing more, when in fact, we know the greatest impact that we can make comes from identifying the most important thing and eliminating everything else that's unnecessary, right? Remember, I said that science of scaling really opened up my eyes to this concept, and then 10 times is easier than two times really breaks it down into tactile pieces. So the framework really aligns with the development of an insurance-based practice, right? Increasing the number of clients does not always improve business, right? Improving structure often leads to more sustainable growth. So, key questions that this book forced me to think about was what activities, like true activities, drive the business forward? What in my business, in my practice, in my businesses plural, can be simplified? And where might growth be limited by thinking too small? This is a huge concept for dietitians, and something that was important for me was like I was very, when I first started as an entrepreneur, I was really small-minded and I kept on telling myself this false narrative of what I was capable of until I really realized people less capable than me were doing epic shit. It did not really allow me to kind of play big. So obviously now I play super big, and this concept of thinking small is somewhat in, kind of in the rear view mirror, but I never forget it. So 10 times is easier than two times. Excellent book for a registered dietitian who is looking really to kind of hone in their focus and make more money doing the shit that matters, right? An oldie but a goodie, Peter Drucker's The Effective Executive. Just a classic book. This book strengthens leadership skills for dietitian entrepreneurs, right? If you know Peter Drucker, you know he is a systems guy. And I absolutely adore his work. So, although this book was published what seems like decades ago, it continues to really be super relevant guidance for anybody who is leading, right? And whether or not you guys want to admit it, almost all of us are leading in our field in some capacity, right? So, it emphasizes really the effectiveness of the just having consistent habits and thoughtful decision making. Two things which I think sound super simple, right? Consistent habits and thoughtful, intentional decision making. But the reality is that I think a lot of us make rushed, uninformed, uneducated decisions, right? And I think a lot of times those kind of create flaming dumpsters of shit down the road that are very hard to clean up, right? One key takeaway for me from the effective executive is that it really emphasizes that effectiveness is a skill, right? I don't think we always think about it in terms of that context, but it's a skill that developed through, over time. It's really about that. So your calendar often reflects your priorities, right? I love this concept. If you look at anybody's calendar, it's going to tell you whether or not they are intentional or not with their most valuable thing, which is their time. So for dietitians building insurance-based private practices, learning to allocate time strategically can significantly influence long-term outcomes. So while that book is an oldie, it is definitely a goodie. And I would so recommend you guys putting on that list, right? Books that help dietitians develop a scalable business mindset. So also another Dr. Benjamin Hardy, so clearly I am a role, is a book, Be Your Future Self Now. I would say if you are pondering books to read of the ones that I've just talked about, and you're struggling specifically with mindset, which a lot of dietitians do, I would really say start with this book. This book explores kind of identify-based making decisions, and it encourages you guys to align your present actions with your long-term goals, right? So kind of this concept of like thinking who you want to be in the future and then like orchestrating it all backwards and doing everything you possibly can now to be that person now. So rather than waiting for shit like ideal circumstances, which we know are never going to happen, this book I found kind of encourages dietitians to begin acting in a way that reflects where they want to go with their practice. And I think this is a concept that's hard, especially if you're in a season of hard where if you're like me, shit seems to be going wrong every single day. It's hard to be forward thinking. We tend to be kind of doom and gloom. So for dietitians, scaling a private practice, this perspective can really support how you can be more proactive with your decision making. And it can really help you guys kind of like cue up your current actions, kind of the shit you do day to day with exactly where you want to go. And like I said, I would really encourage you guys to start with this book because I know for me in the beginning of my career, kind of like getting my mindset like in the appropriate place, which when I tell you it probably took like decades of time to get there. But I found like creating and cultivating the mindset of forward thinking was probably one of the most important things that I did as an entrepreneur. Okay. Books about delegation and building support systems. So once again, another Dan Sullivan, Benjamin Hardy book. Who, basically not how. Okay. I think a lot of times as dietitians, especially solopreneurs, we are constantly like kind of being stretched thin. I was just looking at my to-do list before I sat down and started recording this video. And I became pretty overwhelmed by all of the things in my head that I thought I was the only one who could do and execute. So many dietitians initially build their private practices independently. So you guys are managing both the clinical opportunities and then the operational tasks, right? And just to be very clear, I probably did that for the first 10 to 15 years of my practice, right? I was like the jack of all trades, so I know exactly what this feels like. But over time, growth often requires you guys identifying the opportunities in your business to involve others so you can grow the business forward, right? This concept of working on the business, not in the business. And just in full transparency, like that took me a really long time to understand that concept. And it also took me a really, really long time to pull myself out of the business. So I found that this book was super helpful, Who Not How, because it introduced the concept of shifting from asking, how do I do this, right, to who can help me accomplish this effectively? Completely different framework, but so very important for anybody scaling their practice. So building support systems that can create capacity for continued growth and allow you guys to focus on higher level priorities, right? So, like in the beginning, you have to do all of the things, and I want you to do all of these things. And I know you don't want to hear it, but there's a lot of value in doing all of these things. But as you grow and as you need and want to scale, the who can help is going to be very different than how do I do this. And so if you're a dietitian who's in a season of expansion, whether you guys are looking to add some services to your team, add some team members, whether they be clinical or non-clinical, add a VA to your team, right? So kind of who can help me accomplish this next level in my business, not how can I do this? Because eventually, as we all know, there's just so many hours in the day. And the last book that I wanted to talk about was never on my radar. And and I actually don't have it here. It's probably at my bedside. It's called Monetizing Innovation. And how I was introduced to this book was I was at an event in Miami, and it was an event for founders. But it was just ironic or not ironic that I was one of the only females there. Most of the guys were software guys, and I was old enough to be most of theirs grandmothers. So a young but educated and very successful room of founders. What I loved about that is I must have had a good radar. I picked a good table. And two of the founders were in their early 40s, so we were probably the oldest table of the bunch. And one of the gentlemen had a pretty substantial exit in his software business, where I think he exited for over $100 million. And we started talking about different things in the dietitian space. And we talked about pricing. And the question he asked me was, how do you know that that price that you set X for is the appropriate price? And I started to kind of scratch my head and I was like, I'm not sure what you mean. But he's like, well, how do you know that people wouldn't pay more for this particular service? And I was like, that's a great question. So he had recommended this book, Monetizing Innovation. And I absolutely loved it. I recommend it a lot to the dietitians in my level three, my Practice Growth Collective membership, because they are dietitians who maybe are adding product services, a la carte stuff, and maybe challenged by how do we come up with a price for this service. So pricing is often one of the most challenging areas for healthcare entrepreneurs. This book, like I said, Monetizing Innovation, really explores how value, right? How you can articulate your value and structure it more intentionally and emphasize pricing decisions, right? I think a lot of times people look to competitors for price suggestions. Um, they look kind of external of our field, who's like lesser than us, probably selling things for more. But the reality is that there is a strategic approach that not just dietitians, all entrepreneurs producing new products and services should be using. So, for dietitians offering programs, packages, hybrid service models, understanding pricing strategy is so freaking critical, right? It can support your business sustainability, right? I think it honestly is going to determine whether or not your business is successful and you're able to sustain those prices. And really, ultimately, can you evolve beyond solely time-based revenue models like those one-on-one models? So, those are just some of a couple of the books that I've really been loving. You guys know I am a gal who just absolutely loves reading new books, and why it is so important for me is those are the teachers that I have because at each stage of business development, it often requires a new way of thinking, right? And so strategies that got you to a successful place in your private practice are probably not going to get you to that next level of scale. I once heard this kind of quote, and I really love it. It is like, at every new level, there is a new devil. And the new devil is that unknown, right? It's that piece that we do not quite know how to do. We do not have the skill set quite yet, but we know we want to get on the other side and kind of knock that devil out. So, personal growth books for me kind of provide that new exposure to decision making, innovation, strategic planning, and especially for dietitians building private practices, developing leadership skills, business skills, right? You cannot just be a good clinician, unfortunately. And be a phenomenal businesswoman or business guy. So I hope you guys like enjoyed these books or like you enjoy them at least as much as I do. Like I said, for me, these guys are like my teachers. And I think as I read them, the way that I discover new books is I might read a concept in one of these books, read the footnote, and then it brings me to another book. But these are some of my favorites so far for 2026. I would say leading the pack for me was The Science of Scaling because that really changed my thought process surrounding like what to work on each day to move the business forward. So this is a little bit of a different type of YouTube video. So hopefully you guys enjoy this. If you like this style of content, kind of more general business structure, let me know in the comments below because we'd be happy to work on more content like this for you guys. And then if you have any favorite books so far that you've read, or even just favorite books in general that have had an impact on your life and help you grow as an entrepreneur, drop them below and just let us know. I am constantly looking for books that you guys love because I'm sure if you guys love them, I will also love them. So I'll talk to you guys soon. Hopefully you guys like these books as much as I do, and I'd love to hear some more from you guys in the content.